Hello everybody, it is I, Brian the Pirate, as always, and in today's video, I'm going to give you a somewhat of a review, my first impressions of the Titan Quest 2 Early Access. The game currently comes with a prologue and Act 1, that's all you can get. It took me to do a full clear around about 9 hours, so that's just to give you an idea of how much content there is. That's doing every side quest, exploring the entirety of the map, and just basically doing everything that exists, events, bosses, every quest as I mentioned, 100%ing the current available content in the game. Now to begin, I haven't played Titan Quest 1, I have however played quite a bit of Grim Dawn, so I'm going to be making quite a few comparisons to that, also some comparisons to Path of Exile, maybe a bit of Diablo 4, Last Epoch, games that most of you are probably familiar with because that's why you subscribe to this channel, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel, perhaps you should. Now to start things off, I'm going to talk about general expectations that you may want to set for yourself before making a purchasing decision. First of all, the game is, as I mentioned, in early access. You get the prologue and Act 1. The devs have said that they intend on releasing content every 3 months, so every quarter essentially. As to how much content those updates will add, if it's another act or if it's just more classes, things like that. We don't really know that yet. Do just bear in mind, if you were to purchase the game today, you are purchasing an incomplete game. With that in mind, speaking to my own experience, as I said, it took me about 9 hours with one character to clear all the content. I only came across one bug. Now, obviously, this is my personal experience. I can't speak to other people. I know they may have come across other bugs or crashes. I only had one bug where I attempted to go down a ladder and I just came at it at a janky angle and it ended up just sticking in this animation where I bounce to and fro between this ladder and the spot that I was stood when I clicked on it. Aside from that, the gameplay experience was otherwise very, very smooth. The occasional frame drop whilst using DLSS. Usually when I was exploring an entirely new area, particularly in like larger dungeons, like there's one towards the end of the act, for example, where I would suddenly experience a massive frame drop. It would only be a hitch that would last a second or two, but do be mindful depending on what hardware you're using, what settings you're using. You could find yourself getting killed if you experience these frame drops at a bad time. Of course, these things may get optimized and no longer be a problem once the game releases at 1.0. Another thing to be mindful of is the game is currently the cheapest it will ever be. It's basically half price right now. I believe with a small discount at the time of recording this video because it's literally just released. Devs have said that they will be incrementally increasing the price as more content is released, with the final price being 50 bucks or 50 euros at the time of 1.0. UK viewers, that's probably going to be about £40. And whether or not you're going to like this game as a action RPG enjoyer depends on how you approach this game. If you are looking for a live service, a game that is perpetually pumping out content every 3 months indefinitely, adding new items, maybe new classes, new content, acts, etc. all the time, like your Last Epoch's, Diablo 4's, Path of Exile, for example, this may not be the game for you. If, however, you're the sort of person who enjoys the action RPG gameplay loop, but you just usually probably play 1 or 2, maybe 3 classes, and then you go, cool, I had a good time. Ooh, piece of candy. And then you move on to the next game, then this is very much going to be the game for you. Loot is, of course, RNG based. However, the actual maps themselves are handcrafted, which some would argue is better in terms of the first gameplay experience because there's a lot more decisions put into where things are allocated, where events occur, where bosses occur, things like that. But if you do replay the game, do multiple classes and multiple characters, you are going to be experiencing the exact same layout every single time you play. Personally speaking, I can see myself going through maybe 2-3 classes each time, like one of each archetype, like, oh, here's a rogue/range character, here's a spellcaster character, here is a sword and board character archetype that I'm going to play. And you can, of course, make various builds with the options that you're given. Technically, I think you could make up to 16 different classes because it's a dual class system where you pick, for example, the rogue, and then in my case also the warfare class, and it's very similar to Grim Dawn, this dual class system, which then makes this master class. Some general thoughts on the game itself before I dive more into the systems is graphically, it's a very beautiful game. The level design, with it being handcrafted, is very, very beautiful. Some of the dungeons and areas that you can go into are very spectacular. You do find yourself running to the edge of a cliff or a ledge of some sort and just gazing upon into the background and really admiring the art that's there. The graphics aren't quite as high fidelity as, say, Path of Exile 2. It is on Unreal Engine 5, however, so it is a very pretty game. But if you're expecting like the best graphics on the planet, you're not going to get that, even with high-end systems such as mine. However, the art style just makes the game just look very, 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 very pretty, especially if you're into the whole Greek mythology and Greek environment. It's a very sunny country. There is a day-night cycle you get to enjoy as well. So during the daytime, a lot of the locations that you're in are very vibrant and bright and very nice to look at. Lots of grassland, things like that. Obviously, as you progress through the acts, I imagine there's going to be more variants in biomes and things like that. But obviously, I can only speak on what is currently available in early access. I would say the game currently is a little bit more slower paced in comparison to, say, Last Epoch and Path of Exile. I say currently because it's only the first act of the game, so you're not really at an end game build point where you may have invested more into movement speed and things like that. There are movement abilities, they have cooldowns. However, there are ways to reduce cooldowns and whatnot, either through passives built into the skills or through gear. But if you're the sort of person who just likes to teleport all over the planet in a matter of seconds, destroying screens of mobs at a time, currently in the early game, that's not the experience that you're going to receive. Just to reiterate, when it comes to end game, that may well change when you've got more access to a full set of skills, gear, and whatnot as well. In terms of depth, I'm a big fan of build crafting. It's one of the reasons I mostly play Last Epoch and Path of Exile over, say, games like Diablo 4. I would place Titan Quest 2 in terms of build complexity, build variety, and the build crafting aspect in around about the same position as Last Epoch, maybe with a little bit less variance, and I'll go more into the passives and skill systems later and how they actually function. But if you're looking for something that is more fulfilling, at least in my case, than say Diablo 4, which is basically pick a skill, then 2 options, and then whatever aspects have the name of that skill in it, and you actually have to have meaningful choices or want meaningful choices in how you spec your build, then I would say that Titan Quest 2 is very good at doing that, but it is by no means anywhere near as deep or complex as, say, Path of Exile 1 or 2. In terms of the actual content, there are various events that you can engage with. Like sometimes there's a trap that triggers when you loot a chest, or a statue appears out of nowhere and starts shooting crap at you whilst you're trying to light some braziers to turn that statue off, or turn off the firing mechanic. There are places where you can get teleported to another location and then you have to do some kind of puzzle game. There's quite a bit of variance. It's all very thematic. It's not kind of here's some random laser beams for poops and giggles sort of thing. So similar to Grim Dawn, there are also some small secret areas. I don't know if the intention is going to be that there's massive hidden secret areas that aren't actually on the map, even if you reveal all the fog of war. For those of you unfamiliar with Grim Dawn, for example, there are entire zones you may discover by going under a bridge, not knowing that it will actually lead and continue on and that there's more terrain to navigate. And suddenly you're in this entire new area that's not marked on the map, and that may contain an additional quest or just additional places to loot. There are smaller areas, however, in Titan Quest 2 where you maybe go through a gate, and on the map it says it's the edge of the landscape, but if you actually continue and go through the bushes or through navigating through the trees, you may discover there's actually an additional chest or two hidden away that isn't actually marked on the world map. Speaking of the world map, it is a similar system to Diablo 4. There is no overlay, which personally I dislike. I know a lot of people are like, oh, just look in the corner. I like to see a lot further ahead when it comes to utilizing a map, and I don't personally like having to hit M. That brings up a full screen map and actually stops me from being able to play the game whilst I look at where I'm going. So something I would love to have added is just an overlay where you can set the opacity, make it as transparent as you want, and then plow through all the mobs and monsters that you want to kill without actually having to stop, press M to reveal the entire map, and then go, oh, I'm supposed to be heading this way, things like that. The bosses are quite fun. I believe there was 4 in total across the prologue and first act. They're not insanely hard, although one did catch me a little bit by surprise. In terms of difficulty overall, in fact, there is the option to play hardcore, which is obviously 1 death and that's it. Otherwise, you've got like an easy mode and then the normal mode, and then within the normal and presumably hardcore modes, when you reach the first major hub or town, there is the means to increase the monster difficulty by increasing their monster level, let's say, by a maximum of 5 at the cost of gold. You can then also, if you wish to re-explore areas that you've been, raise the minimum level to match your level. So say you cleared a level 1 area, but you actually liked exploring the area. Potentially there's some loot tables involved. I can't confirm that, but let's, for the sake of example, say there is, and there's a particular item that you, or a particular monster that you wanted to farm. You could then increase the minimum eye level to, or monster level rather, to yours, and then go back to that zone, which would give you better chances of loot dropping and things like that. Otherwise, like I said, the difficulty, I was at max monster level the entire time. As soon as I got the facility to do so, I just whacked 5 levels into it. I do have quite a bit of experience with action RPG, so it was very easy for me to come up with a pretty potent build where I went all in on crit, where I was doing 2,000 to 2,500 damage with crits, and I had 100% crit uptime. So maybe I just had a really potent build. I also tend to play like high mobility builds, so my build had a lot of dashing and mobility in it, which enabled me to avoid a lot of damage. So of course your experience may vary if you're not into high mobility builds, or you're not very good at dodging. I know not everyone is. Some people like to go and tank the damage instead. So maybe if you're playing that sort of build, you might have a different experience, be it more difficult or otherwise. The bosses I did play in Act 1, though, they did have a reasonable variance in mechanics in terms of what movesets they had and what damage types they could do. And I do suspect that in later acts and towards endgame, you're going to end up with some pretty difficult boss fights. In terms of monster density, there is a reasonable pack size to the monsters. Again, if you're expecting endgame Path of Exile pack size, 1, that's a silly expectation to have because this is the early game, it's Act 1. And 2, I doubt it's going to be that busy of a game even towards endgame anyway, because it's more about the impactful experience of navigating through these Greek mythological lands and having a bit more of a somewhat engaging combat system. Speaking of combat, I did find it to be pretty fun. It was standard action RPG fare. You do have the options of using WASD. The WASD isn't as good as Path of Exile 2's. For example, in Path of Exile 2, where your pointer is where your character looks, which makes things significantly smoother when navigating around objects and also when you do certain attacks. Whereas in Titan Quest 2, you could be traveling with, say, the W key in that direction, but you're wanting to click on something in that direction. There was one skill, I want to say it's Flicker, where it was basically a dash on the rogue, where I'd have my pointer in one direction and then I'd hit the skill to do the dash, but it would actually dash in the direction I was currently running, which is going to take a lot of getting used to, especially if you're someone who's coming from Path of Exile 2, where you just go where you're looking, and where you're looking is where your pointer is. Terrain was sometimes a little bit of an issue, and I'm not talking like Diablo 4 mount clipping everything on the planet kind of issues, but there were times where I would run into some terrain and it would be somewhat obscured because of maybe grass or something covering it up, so I didn't really realize there was a ledge there. So you occasionally run into that sort of thing. Also with projectiles, I did notice on occasion I would fire a projectile above some terrain, like, I don't know, a giant rock, but despite it being a centimeter or an inch or so higher than this rock, it would still somehow get blocked by it. So occasionally that did happen. It was a little bit annoying, especially with the build that I was playing, which was very energy cost intensive. So I'd be like, oh, I've just wasted like 50 energy to hit a rock. Outside of that, however, like I said, I didn't run into any like major bugs or even minor bugs aside from the ladder thing. The combat does feel fulfilling. There is a lot of variety in the monsters that you come across, even again in such a short amount of content. However, there may be times where you're maybe doing a bit of backtracking due to the nature of the open world. Once you've cleared a place out, unless you specifically go to that ritual statue I mentioned earlier to respawn things, you'll be running through empty zones. And occasionally there are times where you're running from one pack and then cross an entire screen to discover another pack. It's not massively dense, but again, that may be through optimization be something that changes, and they may drop some more monsters in. Music was fantastic. I won't go into too much detail. I'm very much a fan of like string instruments in my action RPGs. Big fan of the Diablo 2 soundtrack. The Witcher 3 soundtrack, absolute banger. I would say is quite similar to Titan Quest 2. So if you enjoyed the Witcher 3 soundtrack, I think you're very much going to enjoy the soundtrack in Titan Quest 2. One thing to note with my 9-hour playthrough is that I did skip dialogue, reading notes, statues, things like that. Not because I dislike lore, but because I didn't want to get fatigued by playing it over and over again as updates come out and then be like, oh, I know the Act 1 lore because I've played it 20 times. I'm going to wait until 1.0 comes out and then do a proper full lore playthrough. So do bear in mind, if you are the sort of person who on your first playthrough through Act 1 and the prologue and you're going to pay attention to all the lore and dialogue, that may add a considerable amount of time to your playthrough, because the NPCs, they're all voiced, by the way. They do have a fair bit of dialogue. There's usually various options where you can ask them further questions with regards to quests or zones and areas for a bit more information, things like that. So first, of course, you create a new character. At the moment, it's based on presets. I assume at some point, since there's a finalize option, that you will be able to customize it a little bit more. But otherwise, you pick your preset with it being bearded or whatever, and then your body type if you so wish. That's all it is when it comes to the customization, outside of obviously items and what kind of gear you want to equip. For my first character, I just went with a hot lady, named her after a character from one of my favorite series of books. If later in the game you decide that you've got an ugly ass helmet like I think I do, you do have the option to disable that. And of course, if you've made a customized character, assuming those features come in a future update, then you get to admire your pretty little lady or man that you've made. Now I've got the inventory open, so let's cover that sort of stuff first. As you can see, you get a generous amount of inventory space. You of course also have the Tetris-like system. I prefer this type of system when it comes to action RPGs. I like the idea that I actually have to manage how much stuff I'm carrying. I know this is a bit of meme in the Path of Exile community, but it adds weight to that gear, in this case quite literal. Like a two-handed item takes up 8 slots, whereas a hat takes up 4 slots. And it also helps you with, especially if you're a more lower placed player, you may make more economical decisions where you may notice that this 4 slot thing is worth substantially more than the 8 slot thing, so you drop the 8 slot thing so you can fit more 4 slot things into your inventory to then sell out a vendor later on. Little things like that. There is also a weapon swap system, so you can do that with the tab key. I do think this is intentional to actually be used as well. Usually when there's a weapon swap system in action RPGs, it's more or less only used to just carry more stuff as opposed to items that you intend on utilizing. Whereas in Titan Quest 2, I do think there is the intention to have like your main weapons on your first weapon set, and then your second weapon set, maybe it's when you've ran out of energy, you can swap to a bow and just spam with basic attacks, which you can actually empower as well in this game. With regards to the itemization, if you have played Grim Dawn, you'll be very familiar with it. It's something very, very similar. You've got common items that are white. You've then got magic items that are blue. You technically then also have like these juiced up magic items, which I believe are called infrequents, which will be green. You don't see those until, at least from my experience, level 19, however. Much like epics that I believe are likewise level gated, you won't see those until 19, level 20 as well, and I'll come back to those in a moment. Otherwise, you got rares. I believe you also get uniques. I haven't seen a single unique beyond like these epic items. I do believe they exist, however, although there is a tier above epics. Much like epics, however, I do assume that they are going to be either level gated or progression gated. Maybe you complete a certain quest, then suddenly you can find this next tier of unique slash better tier of item. Personally speaking, not a fan of that. I hated it in Diablo 4, where you could only get unique items after a certain level. I thought that was really arbitrary and stupid. I love the idea of any drop at any time, be it at level 1 or level 100, could be a unique item or a epic item or just your best in slot item. I think that's a real integral part of the loot chase and the fulfillment you get when you come across randomly by pure chance in an RNG based loot game. It's just such an impactful feeling, and it feels a little bit robbed from you that you can only experience that at specific points in the game. To clarify how the itemization specifically works, white items have like no affixes attached, no modifiers other than like an implicit thing. Blue items will then have the standard implicit. For example, these spoilers have an 18% increased dodge recovery rate because it's light armor. And then of course, in this case, there is a green bit of text that's your affix. That is because of the suffix of death, which adds crit hit chance. You can get 2 of these on blue items. Likewise, on the green items, you can get 2. I believe they're a little bit more juiced up on the green items, though, from what I've seen. Rare items can have 3 to 4 affixes on them. Epic items appear to have at least 7. I've found 2. I can't remember how many the other one had. Potentially 8. As you can see, they are substantially more powerful than rares. This item was actually a quest reward, and the other epic that I found appears to be a specific boss drop and was a named item after the name of the boss. But in much like, say, Grim Dawn, I assume you'll be able to get epic drops in the world rather than from specific content like bosses or quests. There's also a potion system. You've got your health potion as well as your energy potion. As you can see here, these are magic potions. The value of the amount of healing just increases with your level. However, you can get 1 to 2 affixes on the actual potions themselves. In this case, I was all about the regen. At one point, I had a health potion that had something like +2 health regen, and then could cleanse, burning, and chill if on use. Likewise, you can get similar for the energy potions. I assume you may be able to get rare / epic / unique or whatever later in the game. Moving on to the skill and attribute / passive systems. First, we'll cover the skill system. There are things I like about the skill system, and there are also things that I slightly dislike. They are kind of nitpicky, and I'll explain my reasoning behind them as I address them. But for the most part, you, through the prologue, come across these 2 statues. The first one gives you your first class. In my case, I picked Rogue. And then you come across a second statue, which then gives you your second class. You'll be able to pick between Rogue, Warfare, a caster ability, and I think a druid-ish ability, or earth something. I can't remember the names, forgive me. But there's 4 at the moment, and like I said, you can combine those for a total of 16. My understanding is a lot more classes are going to be added as content is added, and then these classes come with their own dedicated passive abilities, which are here on the right, and then your skill abilities, which are here on the left. But whilst I'm here, I'm going to talk about the divinity system. So you can see this bar on the side. This is the divinity system. On completion of certain quests or boss kills, and I think on leveling, if I recall correctly, you require a divinity point, and you can apply it to either your first class or your second class. In my case, I have maxed both of them out. What this does is you can see it's in line with the skills and passive abilities as they unlock. This one is currently unlockable, coming soon, as you can see, which will subsequently unlock this ability and this passive. And I don't like this system. And the reason for that is it feels really arbitrary. There's this bar to the side that I'm occasionally whacking a point into as I'm leveling, and I'm giving this like semi-choice of whether I want to put it into Rogue or Warfare. I assume at endgame you're going to have the capacity to fill them both up anyway, so it just kind of feels pointless and necessary, and they could just tie the unlocking to level progression. Like you get these initially, then by level 10 you unlock the next row, then by level 25 you unlock the next row, so on and so forth. Those are just random numbers, of course, but it just feels like this additional mechanic that's there for poops and giggles when it could have just been done in a better or simpler way. Not a huge deal, just again felt a bit arbitrary, and I just don't think it needed to be added and would make for a better game without it. Looking at the skills more specifically, when you level up, you acquire usually 2 active skill points and 2 passive points. So the way the skill system actually works is you pick the skill that you want to level up, you would click on the plus to juice it up. As you juice it up, you unlock these shield icons, and I'll show you a bit better in a moment. And then you get to fill these slots with passives. These passives then have a cost to them, either 1 shield per point, or in some cases you'll have some that cost 2, which means you can use them less frequently, but they may also only be able to have 1 point or 3 points or 2 points. You don't necessarily get to stack them up 5 times. You can respec at any time by clicking on the respec mode. You can either do a refund all, or you can just do things individually, like this skill here. You can click them all out. It comes at a gold cost, very reasonable gold cost. There was a couple of times where I just respec things or adjusted my build slightly. But to show you how it actually works, in this case, I was using Trick Shot in my build. So you would go, okay, here's the first point that unlocks the first shield. And then you can go, okay, do I want more damage? More, whilst you're on that point, is multiplicative, increased is additive. You're probably familiar with that kind of verbiage in other games. Some of these skill passives are just straight up more or increased damage. Others fundamentally change how the attack works. For example, you've got Shadow Dagger here, turns into a spell and fires a Shadow Dagger dealing piercing damage. It adds the spell and shadow tags, which then you can scale with other items, but removes the ranged attack tag. As you progress and level up the skill, as I mentioned, you will unlock more shields. Sometimes it takes multiple points to get to the next shield, but eventually you will have up to 10. Now, this brings me on to a slight problem I have with this system. It's something, again, I mentioned it earlier, it's a bit nitpicky and it's probably a personal problem and might not bother most of you. I like that we can have up to 5 passives. I dislike that they're inhibited by these 10 shields, and why I think that is, for example, you may go, you know what, I want enhanced damage. So you use all 10 stacks of enhanced damage, and therefore you have 1 passive. This irks me because now I've got 4 slots that I didn't utilize, but I want to. So seeing these 4 empty slots makes me feel like I'm not building the character properly. That isn't necessarily the case. It could be best in slot to just give you this attack 100% more damage, but I don't want to do that. Like I said, it's not a big deal, but just seeing those empty slots, it reminds me of Path of Exile, where you've got essentially a 6 link, where you've got your first gem slot is your skill, and then you've got these 5 other slots to utilize. So in a way, it feels like I'm getting my level 21 skill in Path of Exile 2, and then maybe only adding 1 maximum support gem and then leaving the other 4 sockets unsocketed. Or perhaps I'm only adding 2 points of whatever skills that I actually pick. So it then feels like I've got a level 21 level 21 skill or spell, and then I've added 5 level 5 gems to it for poops and giggles, and it just feels weird in my mind. Again, I don't actually imagine that's going to bother most people, but it does slightly bother me. One potential solution to this that would not necessarily be required, but would make me feel better at least, is perhaps if they just squished the stackable amount. So instead of most of them being 5 stacks, most of them are instead 3 stacks. They just squish the 5 increments into 3 increments, and then that way when you do use 1 or 2 stacks, they feel a bit more meaningful, and there's more opportunity for you to actually utilize at least 4 to 5 slots. Again, I reiterate, it's a small thing, probably just me being nitpicky. I feel like the abilities would just feel a lot more meaningful and impactful if you were able to actually utilize the full capacity that is presented to you, as opposed to just whacking everything into 1 stat, and then you go, oh look, I have 9 enhanced damage, and then 1 point encounter, and then, oh, 3 empty slots. Why? The passive skills, it's very similar, except they're not stackable. You just get to pick 2 of the 3. 1 unlocks at level 4 of that skill, and then usually at either level 6 or level 8 for the second slot. In my case, I was playing a 100% uptime on crits, so I just wanted the crit chance, and then a crit chance multiplier. However, I also have the option to get even more crit chance at the cost of a crit multiplier. And like I said, you've got very similar options when it comes to some of the other passives, or feats as they're called. So you got lifesteal, added base lifesteal, or I could get additional vitality damage, which is a damage type that does vitality damage. Who knew? Or I could change it and convert it to spell damage, things like that. There is, again, quite a bit of variety, some meaningful choices, especially in the skills rather than the passives, but there are a lot of passives that you can customize in such a way that it feels a lot better than, say, in comparison to Diablo 4, where you're presented with very obvious options. Let's say, for example, you're playing a dot build, so you go, oh, well, this has a dot mechanic, so I pick dot. Oh, this has a crit mechanic, so I pick crit. It's more of, I'm playing a crit build, so do I want to change how the crit functions, or just get a lot more crit, or perhaps at the cost of crit, do something else that betters my damage or changes the skill in some way. Meaningful choices that make you stop and think, and you pause for a moment and you go, what is better? Maybe you want to test things around, and ultimately leads to a more fulfilling build experience. Now, I understand that some of you, probably Diablo 4 players, may be hearing that and going, I don't want that. I want a more casual experience. And there is nothing wrong with that, to be clear. I personally enjoy build crafting, so I want those meaningful choices rather than smashing my face on the keyboard and making an endgame build. So do bear that in mind if you are looking for a more easygoing, less thought-intensive, let's say, experience, then potentially Titan Quest 2 might not be for you. Now, you may have noticed there's this core tab as well. Now, core, I actually think is quite cool. You've got these same functions regardless of what class that you're playing. In my case, I went with dodge because I actually use dodge a lot to enhance my damage and get additional crit and things like that. So you can actually add different mechanics to your dodge ability or get more charges on your dodge ability. In my case, I went for 1 more additional charge. I went for additional distance. And I also went for the enhanced crit and damage at the cost of a bit more cooldown duration. But you can also add increased speed after doing a dodge, for example, the actual speed of the dodge and how you're immune to damage for. You can change it into a teleport. And you can also add this flow mechanic, which ties in with the skills in various ways. But also, as I mentioned earlier, you can actually enhance your basic attack. So you've got your weapon set 1 attack and your weapon set 2 attack. So it is potentially possible to just make a basic attack build and have things scale off it, there are quite a few interesting options, or perhaps more interestingly, turn your basic attack into a way that buffs your follow-up attacks. I'm not going to go through all of them, but as you can see here, projectiles penetrate +1 targets on your basic attack at the cost of 1 energy cost. So potentially you may just buff the hell out of your basic attacks and then use your passives to enhance your basic attacks in various ways to maybe give them AoE and things like that. There's also the barrier skill. Every class has this. It's at an energy cost, a barrier that you can just initiate with a 12-second cooldown. You can reduce the cooldown through the passives. You can change how the barrier functions, if it gives you additional damage, things like that. Also, how much barrier you get scales on the type of items you get. For example, you've got some shields. I was using shields that had an implicit that gave me glancing blow chance, but you can get shields that just give you a lot more energy, and likewise for different armor types as well. In my case, I didn't really utilize barrier much in terms of speccing it out and in terms of items, so I just got 501 extra health that would eventually drop off after a certain time period. Next, we have the attribute system. Now, if you've played Diablo 2, you're probably going to do what I did here, especially if you're playing hardcore, where you utilize enough points in agility, might, and knowledge to equip your gear, and then everything else is going to go into vigor. The reason for that, as you may have noticed as I highlight over these, every time you put a point into agility, it will put points into fitness and cunning. If I put a point into vigor, it will likewise put points into fitness, cunning, and resolve. It's slightly less because it's more spread out, as opposed to agility that's only splitting them across the two. Through my experience, I didn't need to juice up my main attribute to get damage. I was doing 2,500 damage by level 20. I'm level 23 currently. So I suspect most players are just going to go, how much do I need for my gear? Oh, I need 110 agility. Cool. Everything else goes into vigor because that gives you loads more health, which will subsequently mean that you have better survival. And of course, it will give you damage as well and spec up other things if you need. To go in a little bit more detail on how it actually functions, agility is usually the requirement for light and medium armor, for example, and fast weapons. When you put a point into agility, it will subsequently put a point into fitness, which gives you additional strike and pierce damage. And it also puts points into cunning, which gives you additional poison and lightning damage. Whereas if you're playing a caster, you're more likely to use knowledge, for example, which would then give you the lightning damage that you probably want. And likewise down here, the cold damage that you probably want, or fire damage. Likewise for might, if you're playing something a bit more melee focused, might requirement is usually on heavy, ornate weapons and armor, which will give you additional strike and pierce damage, but also subsequently more fire and cold damage. So again, just depending on the two classes that you picked and the type of armor that you want to go with, that will somewhat dictate which of these three you end up using. As I said, the vast majority of players, I suspect, are just going to dump everything into vigor once they've met those item requirements. I'm not going to go through the stats because there's a lot of them. If you played Grim Dawn, very similar to that. Various damage types, not just limited to elemental damage, but like I said, vitality damage being one example. There's plague, ailments, and things like that. You can have different resistances to ailments as well as like actual damage types, impacts rather than dots, for example, or ailments as they're listed here. Standard ARPG fare. Briefly coming back to the inventory, you've also got the repository that will contain like quest items that you may have found, your currencies that you may have found, and then there's the crafting tab. There's no crafting in the game yet. I don't know if that's because it's gated behind a later act, maybe in Act 2, or if they just simply haven't implemented it. I would hope, if anyone at Titan Quest 2's studio is watching, that it is sooner rather than later, and that we have the ability to pick up like white items and then craft stuff onto them, because that's a very fulfilling thing to do as well. Obviously with some RNG involved, so you don't just immediately make the best weapon in the game. But at this moment, all I can say is that there is going to be crafting. I just don't know how good it is, or what it is, or when it is. If you're really keen on avoiding spoilers, look away now. I'll just quickly show you the size of the map once I've zoomed out. So you've got the prologue area, and then of course you've got the starting area of Act 1, which progresses all the way up here. There's quite a chunk of content. When you zoom in, you can see that there's various, like in Diablo 4, ledges that you can climb and jump across. You may have noticed through the gameplay footage, there's quite a bit of verticality, and again, the level design is quite exquisite. It's very open worldy, similar to say Diablo 4, or more akin to Grim Dawn in my case. There are various dungeons, events, quests that unlock dungeons and events and subquests, things like that. And of course, you've got these portal waypoints throughout the world map as well that you can navigate between quickly. You do have a town portal. It is bound to L by default. When you click it, it's infinite. There's no scrolls or anything. You can click it and then go to any point that you want. If you die, you do spawn a portal on death, unless you're playing hardcore, of course. Once you kill a boss, they drop a relic, which enables you to then respawn the boss and farm them. They drop quite a bit of gold, as well as items and also experience. So you may come across a boss that you just decided to murder in 0.1 seconds and gone, I could farm the crap out of that for a bit of a level boost or whatever. In that case, you'd come to this glorious statue here, the Ritual Shrine. You've got Rituals of Athena, which will allow you to refund all invested attribute points at the cost of gold. And then you've got the Ritual of Ares. So the Ritual of Ares will enable you to scale up the level of the monsters. As I mentioned earlier, you can go up to a maximum of 5. By default, it will start at 0. I maxed out as soon as I was able to at a gold cost per level up. I can't remember how much it cost in total. I think it was a few thousand. Gold is no issue. I gambled quite a bit as well. I think in total, in the 9 hours that I played, I probably farmed a good 50,000 plus gold. Then there's elevating the enemy levels in previous areas. So all the areas that you've previously completed, you can click on this. This will subsequently bring everything to a minimum of level 23. But of course, in conjunction with the adjust difficulty, it then subsequently adds another 5 levels on top. So now everything I come across in Act 1 is going to be level 28. You've also got respawn enemies in area. So if you are, again, assuming there are maybe loot tables in the game, maybe certain rares or certain monster types have a better chance of dropping certain loot, maybe you're really keen on farming crabs, you can then activate this to respawn the crabs in some of the more swampy zones where there are a lot of crabs, and then you can go and farm those and repeat it, because once you kill things ordinarily, they're dead and that will stay clear until you reload that zone or activate it again. There are various vendors throughout the game. One thing I noticed is sometimes you won't have these multiple tabs, which I thought was really weird. Sometimes it would just give you the all items tab and then just the buyback tab. Mostly though, you will usually have these that will break it down. So if you just want armor, you can look at the armor tab, likewise weapons or melee weapons, ranged weapons, shields and talismans, and of course jewelry. Some vendors are trash and will offer you trash. Some of them, the blacksmith for example, usually had some rare items. There were occasions where I did buy better stuff. Occasionally they'll offer white gear that might have decent damage. Human crafting comes in a later update and isn't gated behind progression. You may go, ooh, that's actually a perfect base, let me buy that, and then you'd craft upon it. Otherwise you'd be looking for decent blues and yellow items. There was one trader I think that would also offer green items, and there is a gambler that you find at some point throughout Act 1 where you have a random chance to get anything from white item to, I found a green item, potentially also an epic. I didn't try to find out, or try enough to find out rather. Some of the vendors are more specialized, so you've got the Arcanist for example. So if you're playing a caster, you're more likely to want to go to them because they will of course sell you staves, mage armor instead of like heavy or light armor, things like that. And of course you have a stash. Pretty standard fare. You can buy multiple tabs. I don't know how many you can buy in total because I haven't needed to. Apparently 10 are available. I don't know if that's gated behind progression level or presumably not microtransactions. My understanding is they have explicitly said there's going to be no microtransactions in the game, just DLC expansions in terms of content. But for the cost of some gold, you can buy an additional tab. You can then likewise adjust the name of the tab, adjust the color, use common icon for whatever reason, so it's more distinguishable if you need to use it. And then similar again to, let's say, Last Epoch, there's a bit of functionality there just to make your gear management a bit more manageable. One thing that is missing from the game, but I hope is going to be added at a later point, and that is a loot filter. I've played a lot of Last Epoch and of course a lot of Path of Exile, and having a loot filter is somewhat integral to my experience. I do suspect that towards the end of Act 1, people are going to start feeling the need for a loot filter because eventually a lot of loot does start raining down, especially after killing bosses. There can be instances where you'll kill something and there's a loot explosion and it's all white items and you don't care, or there's a buckload of yellow items but you're already kitted out in epic gear so you don't care about rares anymore, things like that. So I hope they do add some kind of loot filter functionality. I know some people don't care for it. I think they are a minority, however. It does just declutter the screen. Also, sometimes when there is loot on the ground, it can make it a bit difficult to click on monsters or interact with objects. So again, having a loot filter to just remove the unnecessary items that you have no interest in would, of course, clear that up and make it a lot more manageable. In conclusion, I think Titan Quest II Early Access is a good foundation. There are definitely things that I really love about the game. I do enjoy the build craft for the most part, aside from my minor qualm. I think the combat is fulfilling. I think the environments are beautiful. The level design is beautiful. I love being able to just explore Greek mythology, which I'm a big fan of since when I was a kid. The UI could maybe use a bit of polish. I would like to see a loot filter. I'd like to see an overlay map. I personally haven't experienced a lot of bugs, just some slight optimization issues and that one ladder bug that I had. And I got 9 hours of content. I'm actually going to play more, to be fair, with different classes. But with my first playthrough, I got 9 hours of content out of it. £20, which I think is $25, those of you in the US. And if you are the sort of player who really enjoy just going through Grim Dawn and enjoying the content rather than just blasting things at the speed of light, then this is definitely going to be the game for you. If you're someone who's maybe looking for a palate cleanser after completing a League or Cycle, which I think they've now renamed to Seasons in Last Epoch, and you just want something that is a bit more slower, a little less intensive, then perhaps this is going to be the game for you as well. But if you are looking for a live service game that you can become addicted to for years to come, it's not that type of game. It's a handcrafted experience where most of you will probably play it once, realistically speaking. You may not even finish it because most people don't finish games, statistically speaking. Personally, I suspect whenever there's a major update, be it an expansion or whatever, I'll probably play one of each archetype, mixing it up, doing a different build each time, 1 to 2 or 3 times, and then I'll say, it was fun, I had a good time, and then I'll go to one of my other games, Path of Exile, Last Epoch, etc. As I mentioned towards the top of the video, it is currently at half price of what it will be at release. So for me, that was 20 Great British Pounds. That price will steadily increase as they add these content updates every 3 months until 1.0, and at which point it will be twice the cost it is now. So if you want to get the game cheap, I recommend it. I do. Maybe not necessarily play it until it's released into 1.0, but if you can get it for £20 or 25 US dollars, do it. I suspect it's going to be a very fulfilling game once it is released. I suspect that you will get a lot out of the build crafting, out of the potential story, at the very least the exploration aspect of it. I think the devs have really got a good foundation here. I have confidence that they will make a fun and fulfilling game by the time 1.0 comes out. And yeah, I think it's worth dropping some cash on this one. That's going to be it from me though. If you enjoyed this video and want to see similar videos in the future, I've got content updates or news coming out about Last Epoch and the Path of Exile League soon to happen. Potentially also a video for No Rest for the Wicked. They recently did a Q&A that I've yet to watch, so I will truncate that down and put that into a video if it's worthwhile for you. Like the video if you found it helpful, and of course I also stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/Brian the Pirate. I'm also Brian the Pirate on just about every social media ever, so if you want to follow me on those, you can do. That's going to be it from me though. Thank you all very much for watching. Farewell. I'll remember you.